In this tutorial, we'll look at how you can create a simple build process for your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with NPM Scripts.
So we are finished with coding the project. Now we want to put it live on the internet so other people can see it. However, before we do that, we want to optimize our files. So here we're going to do the following optimization. So for HTML, we're going to do minification, right? Remove all the white space, right? So that it doesn't take up any space, so that the file is going to be smaller. For CSS, we're also going to do minification, but we're also going to add vendor prefixes, as they're called. So maybe you've seen that before, where you have like WebKit and then box shadow. Right, so you have these this prefix, and we need that because some users are on a very old browser, and that old browser may not know the standard property. In that old browser, it will only work with that prefix, right? So we need to add those prefixes so that it works in older browsers. And we also want to change the pixel unit to the rem unit. That's also a best practice. The reason for that, by the way, is actually very quickly. So in browsers, you can go to settings, and then here in settings, I can go to appearance, and here there's actually a browser font size. So if you are someone with bad eyesight, for example, older people often have this, they can increase the browser font size to very large. And when I do that, you can see that the font size on this page changes, right? But the font size on our project here did not reflect that, right? So nothing changed here. We cannot make that work with the pixel unit, right? So to make that work, we need the rem unit, right? And there's actually a substantial number of people who actually use this feature, right? So that's why we need the rem unit. And then for JavaScript, we're also going to do minification, and we're also gonna do something called transpiling with Babel, because we are using some modern features here, right? So here we have an arrow function. In certain older browsers, this will not work because in those browsers, the arrow function simply didn't exist yet. So with Babel, we can rewrite this to the traditional format, right? So just function, right? So that's called transpiling. So this process of getting your code ready for production is also called a build process. So let's open up the sidebar here. We're going to create two folders here. So we're going to have a source folder. This is where we're going to put our files that we have so far been actively working in. So I'm going to copy all of this, including the CV. I'm going to paste it in the source folder. Right now, these files are all unoptimized, right? So now we're going to have another folder. We're going to call that dist for distribution. And here is where we will put the files that are ready for production, right? Ready for distribution. And so in here, we're going to have the files. It's going to be the same code, but the files are going to be optimized. And when you do that, by the way, you will now get an error when you go back to your browser, because now the HTML file is not in the same location anymore. So live server doesn't know where it is. Okay, now to do those tasks of minification, adding vendor prefixes, transpiling, we're going to use NPM packages, as they're called. So basically, for example, to minify the HTML, we're going to use this package called HTML minifier. This is JavaScript code that other people have written and that we can use. So this code can take an HTML file and it can output, well, a minified HTML file, right? So this one can, for example, remove all the white space. So we want to download this package, and which is JavaScript code, and then we want to run that JavaScript code. Now to run JavaScript code, we need a so-called JavaScript runtime on our computer. And the most popular one is called Node.js. So maybe you already installed this, maybe not. But if you install this, we can run these packages, right? So very quickly, I'll just show you what you can expect here. If you already have installed this, you can fast forward out of here. Okay, so if you clicked on that button, eventually you're going to see the setup wizard. So here, of course, you should read that. Right, don't change anything here. Okay, so here it shows you what it's going to install. So it's going to install Node.js, the runtime itself, and then also core pack, which is not important here. But it's also going to install NPM. So NPM is a so-called package manager, right? We'll see what that means. And don't change anything here, right? So we can just click next. You don't need to tick this here, just click next. And then you can install that. right? So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do that. You can pause the video, and once it's done, you can resume the video. Okay, so I'm gonna assume that you installed Node.js. I'm gonna close all the files here by clicking on this icon, and then I'm gonna open a so-called terminal. So you can go to terminal and you can click on new terminal. You can also use the keyboard shortcut. When you do this, you will see a terminal here in Visual Studio Code. We can write commands here, right? So usually we use our mouse to click around and, you know, thereby giving instructions to the computer, right? So I can click on here, and here we can create a new file, right? That's what we've done. However, I can also write commands to do that, right? So there are certain commands I can write here that will also create a new file if I want that, right? So this is just a different way of giving the computer instructions. I'm using the so-called command prompt here, but you may see something like Windows PowerShell, or if you're on Mac, you may see something like Bash. It doesn't matter, it's all gonna be the same commands. So what we're gonna write here is node-v. And this should show you the version of Node that you have installed. Right now, you may have a different version installed, and that's completely fine because you're watching this at a later moment in time, right? But you should see some version here. If you see an error or some other problem, you probably don't have Node.js installed correctly. The shell, right? So those command prompt, PowerShell, Bash, those are called shells. What I'm using here, the command prompt, is the same as this. Maybe you've seen this before, especially if you're using Windows, right? So Visual Studio Code is also called an IDE, an integrated development environment, right? So it goes beyond just editing code. Okay, now what we're gonna do here, we want those NPM packages, right? Now we need to make our own project a package as well, because everything in the NPM world is a package. So we're gonna say npm init to initialize our project as a package. Now it's gonna ask you a couple of questions, but we can just press enter everywhere here. This is not really important. Okay, now when you do that, you'll see a new file here called package.json. This contains information about your project. And let me actually make this a little bit bigger in the terminal so you can see what we're doing there. Yeah, so in the package.json file, this is not really important for now. Okay, so now we want to download those packages that we're gonna need to do those tasks. And they're actually, you know, there's a bunch of them, so you can just copy that from below the video or in the GitHub repo. So you can just paste that right here. It's quite a lot. So what we're doing here is npm install, and we want to save these packages as so-called developer dependencies, which means that our project depends on these packages in development. Okay, but the packages that we're installing here are HTML minifier cursor. This is for minifying the HTML file. Then we have post CSS. This is a package that can take a CSS file. It can make it available for manipulation for so-called plugins, right? So in the world of CSS, you need post CSS and then you have plugins. So here we also have post CSS CLI because we're going to use it in the command line interface. That's what the terminal is. But the plugins for post CSS are CSS Nano. This will minify the CSS. And then we also have auto prefixer. This will add those vendor prefixes so that it will work in older browsers. And then we also have post CSS pixel to rem. This will convert the pixel to the rem unit. And then for the JavaScript file that we have, we're going to use Babel for transpiling, right? So for example, to convert the arrow function to the more traditional function format so that it will work in all the browsers. It's actually equivalent to what we have with auto prefixer in CSS. Right, this is just to make it work in all the browsers. Now Babel also has CLI because we want to use it in the CLI. And it comes, you can have all sorts of settings for Babel, but we just want a standard set of settings. So that's also called a preset. And then we also have uglify.js. This is what we're going to use to minify the JavaScript. Okay, so then I'm going to press enter here, and it will take a couple of seconds before all these packages are installed. Okay, so eventually it should be finished. You may see some warnings, but usually this is not really important. When you do that, a couple of things have changed now. So in the package.json file for our project here, now we have a new key here, dev dependencies. So this is the list of packages that we are using during development, right? So if someone else wants to work on our project, they can see, oh, I need to install these packages because this is what we're using in this project, right? So that's what we see in package.json. Now we also have a package log.json. This is basically keeping track of all the versions of the packages. That's not really important here. And then we also see node modules. So this is actually where the code of those packages are placed by NPM. And this is usually a big folder. And that's because, well, we have auto prefixer here, right? We installed this. Now auto prefixer has a package.json file. And if you scroll down, you can see that auto prefixer also has dependencies. So it depends on these other packages, right? So for example, it depends on post CSS value parser. I don't even know what that is. Right, so auto prefixer can only work if this package, post CSS value parser, is also installed. So if we look here in this list of node modules, post CSS value parser, right, it's right here. So this has already been installed for us as well. And this package also has a package.json file, right? So this one may also depend on other dependencies, right, which also need to be installed in order for this package to work correctly, right? So you get like a tree of packages, and NPM downloads those packages as needed automatically for us, right? So NPM is also called a package manager. It hosts those packages, but it's also a tool that we installed to manage the packages on our computer. Okay, so now we have the packages installed. Now we want to run those tasks on our files. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into package.json here, and here we're going to write some scripts. So we're going to remove this test script because we don't want to do any tests. But here, for example, let's start with the HTML. We want to minify the HTML. So I'm going to create a new script, and I'm going to call it, well, quotation marks, minify HTML. Right, that's the name of the script. And then I want to use that package HTML minifier cursor. I have to use the name of the package. And then it wants to know which HTML file. Well, it's this one, right? It's sitting in the source folder. So I can write source index.html. And then it wants to know what specifically do you want to do? Well, I want to collapse the white space, right? So with options, usually you have 2 dashes. Collapse white space. And then another option is where should the output be placed? Well, the output should be in the dist folder. I can say output is dist. And then we'll create a new file also called index.html. Right, so this will be the script. And now if I want to run the script, I need to save the file very importantly, otherwise it won't work. So then we can go to the terminal again, and then we can write npm run minify HTML. So if we do this and press enter here, if you now open the dist folder, we should see an index.html file. And actually, if you open it up, we do indeed see that it has been completely stripped of any white space. And so now it's a smaller file, so it will be faster to download for our users. Right, so that's for HTML. Let's optimize the CSS now. So I'm gonna place a comma here at the end, very important. So here we want to optimize the CSS. For CSS, we have a couple of other things than just minification. So here we have to use post CSS that will take the CSS file and basically make it available to the plugins. So it wants to know which CSS file. Well, it's in the source folder and then it's called styles.css. So then we have to say use the plugins, well, auto prefixer for the vendor prefixes, CSS nano for minification. We have post CSS, pixel to rem, and that's without hyphen, pixel to rem to convert the pixel to the rem unit. And the output should be in the dist folder, and we'll also call it styles.css. We don't need to use the equal sign here. So if we do this, if we save here, make sure you save, and then we can run this script. So we can say npm run optimize CSS and press enter. Okay, so now we get a new CSS file here, and if you open it up, we can see it has indeed been minified, and we also see vendor prefixes, right? WebKit here, so that worked as well. Let's see if we can spot the rem unit. So here, it is indeed using the rem unit, right? It's not using the rem unit everywhere, only for things that have to do with the font, right? So here, font size, right? You can also pass options so that it uses the rem unit for all sizing, but this will work. Okay, so that's the CSS. So then I'm gonna add another comma because now we're gonna work on the JavaScript file. Right, our JavaScript file is not huge, but I still want to show you how this works. So here we want to do two things. First, we want to transpile the JavaScript. We're gonna have two scripts here. So first, transpile. That means basically converting, for example, the arrow function, which is the modern syntax, into an older syntax, the traditional function. So people typically use a tool called Babel for this. This is what we installed. So we can say Babel. It wants to know which JavaScript file. Well, it's in the source folder. The output, we can say -o, should be in the dist folder, and we will simply call it script.js again. And then for options, there are a lot of possible options actually. So people typically use a preset, which is just a collection of options, preset options. And the preset that we downloaded here is called @babel /preset-env. Right, so if you have that, then we can run that script, npm run transpile-js. Okay, and we get an error actually, because this should not be preset, this should be preset. So plural, so I'm gonna save that and then try again. Okay, so now we have a JavaScript file here. If I open this up, you can see it actually added use strict here. That's not important for now. But we can also see that indeed we have a function now, right? The traditional function syntax we don't have the arrow function anymore, right? So here in our original file, here we have an arrow function, right? But it's only new browsers that will understand this. Older browser versions may have issues with this. So with Babel, we converted that to the traditional syntax, right? Which will work everywhere. Also, it has changed the const variable to var, right? For the same reason, right? So that works now. So now we also want to minify the JavaScript file, right? So I'm gonna place a comma here, very important. Now we want minify JS. So we can use uglify.js, that's the package. It needs to know which file, and now it's in the dist folder. So we're gonna use the file in the dist folder. And one of the options we wanna pass here is compress. And the output should actually be in the dist folder again, and with the same name, right? So -o dist script.js. Okay, so this is the last one, don't worry. So now we can run this last one, npm run minify JS. Okay, so now if we open this up, you can see it also has been completely minified. Okay, now there's one issue that I just noticed. If you scroll down in your CSS file, it actually adds a so-called source map, right? And this actually takes up a ton of space. So here, where we optimize the CSS, right? The reason it does that, by the way, a source map is because let's say that we open this up in the browser, right? So we make it live on the internet and we see a bug, for example. Since this file is not readable anymore, right? Because we optimized it, with source map, we can still map the issue back to our original file, right? So we can fix the bug in our original file. Now we don't want that here because it actually does take up a lot of space. So here we can add another option at the end, no map. Okay, so I'm gonna save here. Now, whenever we update our project now, and we wanna optimize these files again, right? But we don't want to keep running all of these scripts individually, right? So 4 scripts, one after another. We can also do it with one script, and that one script will run all of these 4, one after another. So this is going to be the final script here, and we're actually going to call it build. So with this script, we can simply say npm run minify HTML, and then after that, npm run optimize CSS. After that, npm run transpile JS, and after that, npm run minify JS. So let's actually do that. npm run build. And you'll see that it runs all of these scripts one after another, right? So that's much easier. Okay, so it will take a couple of seconds. And well, the files, by the way, they will be updated, right? So just to prove that to you, you don't need to delete them, but just to prove that to you that this works, right? So now I have deleted all of these files in the dist folder. And now I want to run npm run build again. I can also just use the up arrow key and it will give me the previous script, right? So you go up or down. Okay, so now I want to run npm run build again, and you'll see that we actually do get the files, right? Right, very nicely one after another, and you can see it still works. They're still optimized. Right, so a little bit intimidating here with the terminal, but don't worry, because usually it's only like little things you have to do as on the front end. Right, so you don't have to understand everything here, but we succeeded now in optimizing the files. Right, let's also copy this cv.pdf file in here, right? Because we are still using that in the HTML file, and it still thinks that it's in the same folder, so it should be here. And now we can also even up the HTML file in the browser, right? From the dist folder, so the optimized file. And this will now use all of those optimized files, right? So you can see it still works the exact same. Right, JavaScript still working, right? Everything still works. Okay, so this was an example of a build process. Now we actually want to make this live on the internet.
By the way, if this was helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Also, check out my courses on CSS and JavaScript if you want to take those skills to an advanced level. Because in there, we will build some beautiful real-world projects from scratch so you can see how everything fits together and really master CSS or JavaScript. And I will also release other courses soon like React and Node.js. So if you want to be notified, then make sure you are subscribed to the email newsletter. You can find the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.